Well, for everybody that's joining, my name is Alexa. I am an overall sexual health influencer, educator, writer, speaker, blogger. Um, I have a podcast called Kaleidoscope Radio that's all about sex, love, and alternative relationships. I have a private practice where I have my clients where I basically help them figure out the life that they really want to live as far as their relationships and their sexuality goes versus living in the box that they were given from early on. And my general what I do is I basically talk sex, sexuality, sexual empowerment all day, every day. It's my jam. So for today's event, I'm really excited because I get to be the moderator for the webinar, Welcoming Your Sex Creature. How I know Mr. Galen is he actually appeared on my podcast not that long ago. And it was a beautiful connection that we had. People were talking about it well afterwards. I took notes while I was going through it because I knew that a lot of what we were talking about was going to help my personal life and my clients. So I was really excited when he asked me to moderate for this event, which is all about embodying your sex creature. So I know today we're going to go into what is a sex creature, but before we even get to that, it's kind of like a recap of some of the other things that have been spoken about on some of the other webinars. Going into your personal erotic myth, just a basic recap, and then going into what is the sex creature. So my job today is going to be paying attention to all of the information that comes in from the listeners and the viewers. I'm going to look at your questions. I'm going to read your responses. I'm going to formulate a nice little banter back and forth with Galen and I, but for you guys to be able to communicate, get your questions answered, thoughts out, that kind of thing. Is that all right, Mr. Galen?
That was excellent.
Thank you.
Wonderful way to roll it on out. Thank you so much for that and for joining in as the moderator, Alexa. And for those who are either in the house right now or those who are going to watch us on video, I'm happy to be hosting today's third Kink-positive therapist webinar, and also it's also open to the public as well. So this is where I want to start before we get into this idea of what does it mean, what is a sex creature, and what does it mean to embody it, and why is that relevant. I want to begin with some background to lead up to that, and I'll start with what I talk about in my practice. What my work is about is normal sex. You know, everyone's sexuality is normal. Their particular personal, it's personal, you know, it's as distinct as a fingerprint and as inherent as their eye color. And I want to move the understanding of human sexuality to this place where it's every human's right to be who they are and their sexuality is normal. But then there's the caveat. And that's where we're practicing and learning now at this stage of this amazing explosion of sexuality, is learning how to handle it and be in integrity with it, both to ourselves and to those we make agreements with, and our partners and our relationships and our other responsibilities in life. This is the other part of my work. What I practice is to help people understand conscious, mature, consensual, negotiated, and ecstatic ways to experience and express their sexuality, because that's the key, that's the critical. You know, this is complex territory, and it requires mature adult behavior to be able to actively engage your sexuality in a healthy way. So the area of sexuality that I focus on and I find most interesting and fascinating, and also is my personal sexuality, is this idea of sex beyond friction. And, you know, and that is the territory of myth and symbol and archetype and these unconscious dimensions where the sex creature resides, actually. So this is what I find to be, again, a place that's not really well, you know, we don't drill down very deep generally as a culture, as an academic psychology of sexuality, or as in therapy. this whole idea of the unconscious and what's going down there is really off the table. It's not been allowed or included in what students who are working on the journey to become a therapist of some sort. None of this is introduced to them, but I think in this explosion of kink that's happening now, it's important to reshape and redefine these psychological models of our sexuality. And in this case, in kink, what I call Fetishsexuality is another term, because I think it is a distinct sexual identity. But this is this place of really amazing content, that we can be exploring and experiencing in this symbolic realm of, the vivid sensations and primal passions, because there is a lot of this, again, back to the sex creature, that is primally generated from our primal natures, which we still are animals, of course. Our gestures, our territorialness, all sorts of our behaviors are still driven from that, which is mostly an unconscious level. So this is what I define as a fetishsexual, someone who has a fetishsexual identity. As you can see there, it's someone who is driven to orgasm or other deep erotic state through their innate, inherent, lifelong desire for a particular range of mythic, symbolic, archetypal sexuality, and in this personal content, they have a personal erotic myth that is including all sorts of the characters and props and attire and all the manifestations of that myth are what is going on when they're driven to orgasm or other deep erotic states. So this is the realm then that the sex creature presides in, and they are part of a pantheon of possibilities of the characters that they might be, or the storylines, or the personas and the actions. That some people are very aware of their personal erotic myth and engage it actively. For others, it's still below the surface in their unconscious, and they get glimpses of it, but they haven't really considered looking at it, that there's something there to look at, because we're such a mind, cognitive driven, irrational being. People, it's because you have to be embodied to start to experience these things, and this is what would give someone access to this deeper connection to this personal erotic myth, if they in fact have one. I mean, I'm not saying everyone has one. I wouldn't be surprised if everyone did, but at least clearly a certain portion of the gene pool is prominently showing up now in the real world, and visible in the world of kink communities and individuals of every stripe. So this is what we're going to be venturing into today with the sex creature. And excuse me a second there. So yeah, today's topic about the sex creature is this thing I want to bring to light and talk about, because it's not often modeled this way. And all I do is make models, conceive of models that seem to fit the experience and the data and things. So I think this sense of the sex creature is a distinct persona, separate from the everyday social persona, is clearly evidenced in my experience. I mean, you see people transform in their body, their tone of voice, the way they gaze at you. They look when the sex creature is inhabiting the body. That's a totally different, intact persona, as I look at it, within the unconscious. But when it's activated, it morphs into our body and takes over and has its totally different. You can see how different and distinct it is from one's other social personas, and it's embodying in this archetypal personal erotic myth way that is characteristic of it. And there could be people have multiple or a range. I mean, it's big territory, but there are some very distinct uh, dimensions of it, and I think it's far more prevalent than people want to give credit for. And so I think this is an area in my research, and I want to be encouraging others to push the edges of what's being allowed academically and clinically as helpful therapeutic models. So, and then this is the thing about the sex creature. It is a very shadowy kind of creature. It's hidden, it stays hidden. Our culture, keeps it hidden. It doesn't want it to be seen. We don't talk about it. We turn our gaze away. And this is why it shows up so prominently in ways that are out of integrity. If it isn't allowed to come out into the light, it's going to operate in the dark and fester there and grow strong, because it is a relentless part of us. The sex creature is, you see so many people struggling with compulsive, sexuality and porning, or sex worker, spending money they shouldn't be, all kinds of out of integrity things are driven by the shadow of the sex creature, and we'll get more into that later. But let me pause there. Now we're going to go into that. And Alexa, is there any thing you want to bounce off of about that?
No, that's beautiful. I have like a couple of people who are also who are listening, and like they weren't really sure what I was doing today, but they can also hear you, and so they're like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, of course. So it's I'm right there with you. I think that my favorite thing about what you said, and what I've heard you say before, is that if you don't acknowledge it, it festers. And it shows up, it rears its ugly head in these really dark ways in the other parts in your life. Should you, in a healthy way, acknowledge it and wind up bringing it to light, you can use it to make your life so much better. You can use it to enhance your life. So, but it's a matter of like going in and figuring out what all of this means for you personally, like going about that journey in a healthy way, which is what I think that you're about to help us with. So it's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being so attentive and keeping us moving down the path here.
Yeah, you have a question from Hector. How does one know if you're fully engaged in persona and honestly expressed, or you're out of integrity? Do you want to take a question now, if you want to take them afterwards?
That's a great question, Hector, and there's no precise answer to that, because there's no full. We have all, the journey is to untangle and get clear about those questions. So if you still have those questions, if you're not clear, that means that's where you're at in the journey right now. And if your intention is to be in integrity, to learn to be fully ecstatically embodied and be negotiable, consensual, honoring the humanity of your partner and all, you'll get there. So you'll notice this is part of the understanding that part of the journey is looking at one's own sexual shadow, to start cleaning up those sneaky, hidden, out of integrity ways that it wants to operate. So it's really about aligning your intention with your actions. And then you make mistakes or setbacks, renew the intention and come back to the work, the practice of moving to a place of integrity around your sexuality. That's when you can really get to experience these deep parts of it, because it takes incredible trust and intimacy with a partner to get to that level. And it takes transparency, communication, maturity, personal work that one has done. This is why I think the journey into sexual authenticity is so powerful, because you do have to come to terms with any way that you're not in integrity, not being fully embodied, not accessing the depths, still stuck or restricted in your gestures, and all those things are part of the journey there. And I'm still getting the hang of Zoom here. I guess here's what I'm going to say, Alexa. If there's something that needs to be said, or somebody's questioning in the chat room, so I don't have to kind of break away and look at that while I'm trying to also do this
Don't
part,
worry.
you
I
can
have
just
a
feed
story.
it along to me.
Yes,
So
of course. Yeah, Hector just
perfect.
responded. I put in the group too, or I put in the group chat that it's beautiful what you said there, the intention behind what you are embodying. That was really
Mm,
powerful. And he said, yeah, it seems like the persona can lead to hiding behind masks. But
mm,
right, that's the journey. And I think as you move on to whatever what's the next part of the webinar, it's going to become very clear as well. I'll make sure you don't have to worry about the chat box.
perfect. Thank you. So in this archetypal view of the sex creature, I first want to tie it back into, I think this is, when I look at this, what's going on has been part of the human tradition, human ritual practices for tens of thousands of years of embodying a part of them that's not their everyday persona. The intention was to, I want to embody my fierceness, or I want to have visions on the eagle, and people so would adorn themselves in masks and attire that represented that persona. So these are ancient practices that humans intuitively had the sense to be able to transcend their everyday humanity, everyday social personas as such, and literally embody or let embody these other energetics, and they would have these out of body experiences and go into states that were beyond their regular range of experience. So I think that was fascinating to me to understand that. I think our sense of and ability at original, what I call the imaginal realms, accessing the imaginal realms versus the cognitive rational realms. Again, this is what I'm saying in clinical and academic psychology, that it's not there, it's meaningless, there's nothing, you can't measure it. So but there's such a rich dimension of our human experience. I think it's a shame that science, quote unquote science, materialistic science, negates that depth of experience that's going on there. So this, in contemporary terms, in terms of kink and the sex creature, this is a specific manifestation of this ability to embody some internal archetypal energetic, that I believe is embedded there. It's innate there, just like the 10% or 8%, whatever, of the gene pool is homosexual. I believe that I just would say 15% or more is what I call a fetishsexual. Just based on the millions of people, tens of millions, maybe even hundreds of millions of people who are interested or checking out or beginning to search out kink, because it's obviously a part of the human psyche, or it wouldn't be showing up so prevalently. So in this journey of humans, in the sense of the stage we're at now, that there's a more contemporary refined. So the origin of it also, is in that image on the left there. It is calling up a very primitive, primal, wild a part of our nature, that the sex creature is connected to this very mammalian and reptilian dimensions of our consciousness and expression and psychology and gestures are coming from in contemporary BDSM interactions. A lot of the behavior is mammal, these fierce kinds of gestures and also the response, of surrendering or turning the gaze away, down, lowering oneself. These gestures are alpha beta pecking order mammalian behaviors, basically. That's the hot-blooded. Then there's the cold-blooded reptilian, you know, gestures and sensibilities, you know, detached from heat, just totally sadistic in its capacity to be the predator that way. So, and in this current era as well, besides of those primitive manifestations, you know, our wild animal, you know, beings, you know, on the hunt, kind of taking down the prey energies. There can also be, and there is, in the 21st century here, many layers of refinement of that energetic, you know. So, I mean, at the core, I think it's primal, but now it, as you can see on that image on the left, it goes off into like fantasy, mythic, you know, sci-fi dimensions, you know, of extraordinary creatures, not actual creatures, and then layers down, you know, that someone is embodying a daddy daughter, or a mommy son, or rapist victim, teacher student, on and on and on. There's thousands of pairings of those dyads, and I believe they occur in the gene pool in pairs. You know, that's why you can look on a site like FetLife, which will have, there's thousands of groups, different groups of different distinct sexual personas that are paired, that are having a group that people join, and well, you're suddenly meeting people from your sex creature tribe, I would say. You know, the yearning is to become a tribe, and if you're actually in the community, you know, that this is why I consider fetishsexuality as an authentic sexual identity, because the definition by the American Psychiatric Association of a sexual identity denotes, you know, a particular type of sexual, you know, desire and yearning for a particular partner of similar nature, the desire to create long-term relationships with those partner or partners, and the desire to form community, you know, to have organizations, groups, events, meetings, blogs, on and on and on, which I think all clearly is happening in the kink community. So by those standards, you know, this is an authentic sexual identity, and the part of the identity is this sex creature, in both primitive and all the many refined manifestations that it can show up in. I think that's what we want to talk about that. So the next, anything to think about there, Alexa, and before we move on?
That little one that popped up was me. There was that sense of, when you said finding your sexual tribe of people, I got a little warm and tingly on the inside, because so many people are hiding these things. And so when you think about those times when you feel when you belong, and something so connected and so personal like your sexuality, you know, it's like you never really want to talk about it to begin with. And then when you finally come about, you know, I love what you're going to go into now is like conjuring your sex creature. But like, once you do conjure it, once you do figure it out, like actually allowing yourself to go be around other people who are like you, so that you feel completely liberated by that. I love that. I wrote that down. I was like, how am I going to help people find their sexual tribes?
Yes, good
Yeah.
mission.
Oh.
It's really typical and common, you know, for either clients or people who, 3,000 people who have taken my Discover Your Personal Erotic Myth survey, to comment, I always thought I was alone. I never realized there were others. You know, those kinds of exclamations, you know, are really point to that, how hidden and secretive and hidden, push down that we keep our sexuality, you know, in terms of not being able to talk about it or show it or reveal it. So it is a real people. I mean, like, whew, it's a huge relief to the sexual psyche to not have to hide it so deeply anymore. I mean, that takes so much energy to
Right.
hide the sex creature,
Right. There is this
and it's
myth.
constantly pushing the edges, and you're trying to push it down. And you know,
Right.
a part of you is uh, being at battle with another part of you. That's an incredible internal tension and stress and harmful. You know, it's
Release it.
terrible.
Yeah, to be able to release it. There's a beautiful solace that you can take knowing that you are not the only one that feels the way that you feel. And
Yeah.
you know, this is this is where there's a little bit of me that comes through where it's like, you know, I go, this is that good shit.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is the good
Yes.
stuff. Yeah. Okay.
Cool. All right. So, conjuring your sex creature. So this is about what I was just talking about. The imaginal realms. You know, cultivating practices that are gateways into your imaginal realm, which is the symbolic, archetypal, mythic level of our consciousness. You know, this is the soul level of our humanity, as I look at it, and this is where we are encountering the underworld. You know, and the upper world. I mean, it's like, you know, as Jung called it, the supra consciousness. You know, where that's where God and all the big energies hang out, and then the lower realms, or the light and the dark, the sacred and the profane. You know, both of those are coexistent. And so, but when we go into wanting to, you know, so making it practical, if someone is like, well, I'm not sure if I have a sex creature, or maybe I know sometimes uh, when I'm getting fucked, you know, I have said, take me, you know. So that's what I call a soundbite from their personal erotic myth. You know, that can be a gateway, you know, where they can begin an inquiry. If they know nothing else, you know, I don't know what's going on or any details, you know, they can start to maybe get a picture by an inquiry of, okay, so taken by whom? Where are you? What are you wearing? What is he or she wearing? You know, are there any props or other implements in the room? What's the energy like? Is it fierce, or is it calm, or etc.? So that's one way that someone can look at what's going on right before orgasm, and any clue. There can be clues there that can reveal or be a gateway to someone to look deeper into their unconscious about maybe hours of content that's really going on there, but it just showed up in that. It's only you know, we keep such a lid on our physical expression, you know, all of our expression, but this shows up in the physical, and that's how strong the sex creature is in that last moment before orgasm. Even if nobody's been saying a word on either side, you know, because that's what most people do. They aren't expressing what they're really, what's going on beyond the friction that's going on. There's you know, there's something else, a story, something going on, like a story. And then that last minute, it'll finally just take over. You know, that's when it does. The sex creature does embody in that last minute or so, 2 minutes before orgasm, where it is suddenly in this fierce, wild, abandon, you know, and has let go of the restraint, you know, and or it doesn't, it's stronger than any restraint. It just, but it might only be there a minute. But if you hear take me, you know, that's a clue, you know. So anything like you might have, and that if you're trying to get more in touch with it, that's one path. Take the Discover Your Personal Erotic Myth survey. That helps a lot of that drilling down as a tool to open up, to get a clearer picture of what your sex creature might look like, as well as what's holding it back or resisting it. You know, you need to look at both of those to take this journey. You know, there can be any kind of you know, art. You can draw, you know, start drawing, or start automatic writing, write a little vignette, you know, from, make up an erotic story, a little, 2-paragraph thing, and just see what's starting to show up, who is in there and what are they saying, and what props and attire are there, any snippets of dialogue are there. Another way is to do a meditational thing and kind of go in as an aware part of you and ask, hey, is my, get to some, take a journey. This is what they call like shamanic journeying, where you, in many ways, they might have a drum beat going on that, is your place to kind of drop into this realm where you take a journey, go to the underworld or the upper world or the middle world. Those are the 3 usual places, but you're going to see if you can encounter your sex creature and ask it, so what's up? What's your name? What do you think of how we've been operating our sexuality, or what would you like? What could help you get more we get to know each other better, get clearer, and those are imaginal processes. Obviously, I'm not saying this is a literal exchange going on. It's an imaginal exchange. Whatever content shows up, it could be very meaningful to you. And once you hear it, it might seem fantastic. Like, wow, I can't believe that. Or some people might go, isn't that like, I'm being schizophrenic or something if I'm talking to voices in my head, Well, no, I mean, we all have voices in our head, and we all have inner dialogues and different parts of us that are continually chattering away down there. So the problem is none of them want the sex creature to show up. I mean, it's literally being, kept hidden, and don't do that. Don't say that. So we that's what I talk about, the resistances in the unconscious. So it's really about whatever way might work for the individual or the client. As a therapist, my job is to help support them to call up these kinds of information. And those are some techniques that I've used to help people to start to get in touch more. As I said, some people are very clear. They've known it since childhood, well before puberty, the kind of the elements of their desire. And other people, it's been, blocked off. They've never looked down there. They don't want to look down there, but yet they know, oh, I'm 50. It's not going away. It's time to, try to get real about it and get true and bring it into integrity. And then just to get to enjoy the ecstatic pleasure of it. I mean, this is the erotic wilderness, as I call it, is a rich, ecstatic, the intensity, the passions, the intimacy and the trust that you can manifest with a partner if you take these deep journeys. It's as good as it gets to be a human soul, I believe. So every pause we'll go back kind of Alexa, and you can kind of chime in there if you'd like.
Yeah, I was asking, as you brought up the questionnaire you bring it up every time whenever you're doing the webinars and things, and you were talking about it a little bit more. So I asked the group if anybody who's on with us has taken the questionnaire. I did, and it's always interesting when you were talking about, the things that you think about the few moments before orgasm. What is it? I mean, I think about all the times that I've had an orgasm in my life, and I have to think really hard. What do I think about? What do I say? Where do I go? And then you describe those planes, and who is that me? It's like, it's an interesting moment of not confliction, but it's like, how do I not know right away? I've done that so many times. How do I know? How do I not know? I don't know. Just hearing you speak about it, it's like, well, I need to go have an orgasm so I can go figure that out. But I did take the questionnaire. I did send all of my information, and I'm going to get, like my community to start thinking about that as well. It's actually something that I started asking my clients as well. Like, what is it? Because it's something that, through talking to you, it's like, I realize that's something that you need to dig past, because it says a lot about who you are as a sexual creature, but you I wrote my notes there. Sex creature, completely embodying it, those last few moments. And then discovering where's your resistance. You know,
Yeah.
when does the self come in? And who is the self? Like, where does it stem from? Is it a societal norm? Is it a religious, something that's been implied upon you while you've grown up? Is it like a traditional thing? Like what is it? Where does that resistance, and how can you wind up turning off that part of yourself
Mm-hmm.
so that you can wind up going fully into what the sex creature may be?
Yeah, that's the externalized and embedded stories, that are authority figures, parents, the pastor, the priest, the rabbi, whatever has terrorized in many ways, as children, you are terrorized about what's going to happen to you if you touch yourself, if you masturbate, if you do these evil things, if you do disgusting things, that's what animals do, or you're going to hell. I mean, I was terrorized. I was raised a Catholic, and got it full bore, so these are the challenges and also the opportunities. I mean, it's great to finally embody your sex creature, and it's great to untangle it from all the resistances. And that's really what I look at the process is, in the therapeutic sense of, to encourage and nurture the desire, or the sex creature and its desire, and diminish all that resists or is afraid or has been traumatized in literal ways as well. All of those things need to be worked through so you can fully embody this part of you when you're in the erotic container, I would say. So, and this next step is just discussing more about this idea of embodying your sex creature. A lot of people talk about kink in terms of role play. And I think role play is not an adequate term for authentic embodiment of your sexuality. I think it is the better term is an embodiment of my sexual persona. Because the sexual persona is a distinct, intact personality within the self, within this pantheon of dimensions of, this idea that we speak of in I am this way or I am that way. I think a better thought is part of me is this way and another part of me is that way, and so my sex creature is a separate part. It has a different sensibility and way that it speaks, acts, interacts, wants to interact. So this idea of embodying is, I look at it as letting the sexual persona be fully in charge of the body, because it has its own gestures, movements, tone of voice, ways it looks, when it's at ease in the body. And this is the point, to get to the place where all is at ease in this embodiment of your sexual persona. It's natural, it's instinctive, because a lot of people, this is like with role play, you're thinking of, okay, so what did I say next? And then what would you do? And, you're kind of scripting out the action, that would be from the heady kind of place, versus embodiment is in a way, quote unquote, you are getting out of the way, because your sex creature already knows and is fully confident in exactly what it would say, how it would move, how it would look at someone, how it would be attired and dressed. I mean, it doesn't have any hang-ups. It's intact in and of itself. What's the hang-ups are all the overlays, and these are physicalities, so this idea of embodiment means, first of all, I think, is to start to just generally get connected to one's own body, living and being in one's own body. And this is like all the practices of mindfulness and different types of yoga, conscious movement, ecstatic dance, all of these aspects I think are important for anyone, regardless of their sexuality, just to learn to become embodied, to be at ease in their body, to recognize that they breathe, and to be attentive to breathing. Breathing, breath is a great way to kind of come back to point zero. If you get lost or get confused or kind of, let's see, where am I? Just take a breath, and that wave of confusion or whatever will likely just keep going, and you can still just stay where you were in your intention and your own presence. So those take practices, and these are, I think, one of the important parts of the journey of embodying your sex creature is to learn practices to be more present, to be more embodied, to feel your body, to know, to move your body. I mean, it's so many people hardly move, that we live in such a heady culture that people who even don't even realize they have a body. They just think they're a head. That's just living the life there. So then once you get embodied and get to be present in yourself, and then you start to open up to your sex creature, there can be kind of a somebody's just at the beginning and hasn't fully and isn't deep yet into their journey. They are going to have to go through some kind of awkwardness likely, or of so for instance, in the voicing, if I'm a dominant voicing, I'm saying kneel down, down, giving some kind of command or other. Yeah, I have a very innate, natural way to do that. That is unencumbered by at least any noticeable part of me that, well, what will they think if I say that? I mean, kind of like levels of our counter forces going on down there. So in the voice is where a lot of people are going to find them. So, trying to talk about their sexuality can literally have another part of them. Don't say that. Choking. We have these internal forces, that are physical. I mean, our inner psyche, our inner conflicts also have a physical counterpart. So part of this idea of embodying is to recognize where things are stuck, or there's not a flow, there's not a grace, a natural grace, so that is places to practice, again, using breath and making more room, for the voice to want to get out, and also shoving aside that voice that's saying, don't say that, for the time being anyway. We can kind of take control of some of this things through interesting kind of creative ways to model and think of what's going on here. So we're able to move through. And like I said, some of it is like initiation. You're not going to go through it except by going through it. You have to speak to your desire and say what it is, and in practice you'll get more and more comfortable through using some of these other practices. And then there is all the ways that you might use props and attire and things. So then again, in this embodiment, so say for instance, if someone's that's throwing a flogger gesture, and they can come from back here. But if you literally grab a flogger or something and just see how your swing is, can you feel like you can really step into it and let it loose, or is it a little awkward? This is a place to start. Okay, what's working that kink out? No pun intended. So that, you can start to notice in your body where you're some awkwardness or glitchiness or something is, the technique is just to slow the gesture way down we're hit the kink or whatever, but just slow enough so that you can move through that glitch there, and then speed it up over time as an example. So these are just some ideas of what embodying looks like, because that's when you're embodying it, then this is the authenticity is profound, this your connection to and your depth of self coming alive in your authentic manifestation of this embodiment is it's a profound and right, it is the experience you're I think sexually we're supposed to have, we're designed to have, if we take the journey and move into that. So it's very important to learn to be embodied, in all aspects of your life. But I think if you really want the full experience, you want to fully embody your sex creature. And that also means you work through whatever has resisted it. So this is the empowering part of the journey. When you're embodied and are authentic and fully there, that is the feeling of empowerment is palpable. It is the strongest it can get, I believe. All right, so anything up before we move on?
No, so we didn't get it. We don't have any more questions just yet, but there was something that you said about speaking to your desires. I even would take it a step further, and people have an issue with that word sometimes, surrender, but I've said it several times, like, surrender to your desires. Just let them happen. Like, do what you can in order to make sure that you are safe in this situation, but surrender to them and see what happens. I always give the mantra of, like, when things start happening and you start trying to reason your way out of something that you really desire, I always say, acknowledge the fact that you've had those feelings come up, and then do the ... and do it anyway. Like, acknowledge, like, I don't know if this is a good idea, but my body is clearly feeling this experience. My body is clearly pulling me in this direction. You have those moments where you're in your mind and you're like, why the hell am I responding this way? I had no idea about how did I not? This is my favorite one. Like, how the hell have I lived this long and I have never figured this out? How have I never, right? But then there's that little voice, a little bit of the resistance that's like, yeah, but what about? What happens after this scene is over? What are you gonna think then? Like, what are people gonna say? Should you ever talk about it again? Those kinds of things. And I say, you know what? Fuck it, ... do it anyway and see what happens, because afterwards you'll sit there and contemplate, I wish I would have, and you'll just masturbate to the thought for several sessions, or forever continue it on, or you continue to have this plain, like, quote unquote vanilla sex. Granted, I love vanilla sex every now and then, but it's like, but you'll fantasize that in those few moments before orgasm, instead of just allowing yourself to go there, to trust yourself enough to just go there, surrender to it and let it happen. And I love the space. It's like, it's very interesting to sit here and listen to you speak in this, in this very matter of fact way, because we're learning, but it's almost hard not to get turned on by it, because it's like that space is so beautiful. Like that fully embodying the sex creature, like thinking about it now, it's like, it's kind of chills, all over your body, where it's like, when you finally understand what that means, to be able to tap into that, and to be able to tap into that when it's not a time to be sexual, to tap into that and do other stuff. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and as you said, to get there requires this very mature, transparent, adult, negotiable, consensual pathways, and intentions, when you are engaging with your partner, because this is levels of incredible trust required to open to those things. That's why we don't, because we don't trust, or we are afraid, and that thought, oh, what if after I think, what the fuck did I do? Or like, well, what would someone else think? All of those, sensibilities are what we're going to talk about right here. Welcoming your sex creature. That's about total ownership and appreciation, yeah, it gives fuck yeah about, yeah, that's who I am. That's where you are want to be and get to, so that those fears of what others think are not even on the radar anymore. It's like, I am who I am. I'm claiming my birthright to be who I am.
Yeah.
And this is what welcoming your sex creature is, celebrating your sexual birthright. Every person has full human right. It's a human right to be who you are authentically, sexually. And it is something to celebrate and be joyous about and ecstatic about. And yeah, that's who my sex creature is. Yay! It's fantastic, and it's going to be met with that same that same ecstasy by a consenting partner. Who you match with. They'll be so grateful that you've claimed, your birthright and are stepping into it, because that's what they want to do too. So liberating yourself is going to be helpful, and liberating others as well, because, we're role models. We're in the vanguard here. I think everybody in this room is really still, it's such a formative phase yet of really how to handle this explosion of sexuality in the culture that's really unprecedented in the history of civilization. Sex has never been let out of the bag like this across the board. So it requires it's complex, very complex territory that requires some depth of understanding, some depth of your personal work to be able to take the journey. Be prepared. Take responsibility, be accountable. This is this requires adult behavior. Don't be wise. Be prudent. And also take some risks. You have to take some risks to step into that. But my experience, though, is if you approach your sexuality and stepping into it, even if it's kind of off the charts, if you're anywhere at some level of maturity or adult point of view, and like I said, being accountable, accepting your own responsibilities for the risks you're willing to take, etc. And you learn how to negotiate and kind of vet and check out things and build trust and intimacy, before you run off into some deep pool. Set all the framework and parameters, so you're going to have can have that fantastic journey, and you likely will. I don't think it's really any great risk to go explore your kink and meet others and engage it. I think there are prudent ways that people are doing all the time, and there are imprudent ways where people get, into some rough territory that they weren't prepared for, maybe. But I think if you approach it as a mature adult, everyone can explore their sexuality in a risk-aware way.
May I ask you a question, Mr. Galen?
Yes.
So something that comes up quite frequently, I seem to inspire this going on the journey to determine what the sex creature. Now that we've had this conversation, I'm gonna use these terms. It seems like I inspire a lot of my clients to go on this journey. It's almost the reason why they find me in the first place to talk about these things, and it gets brought up in my private communities as well. And I'm sure that you've seen it. And it's like, now that I'm going on this journey, the regular old person that I would normally engage in with a conversation, right now that I know that I want to have this type of experience, how do I go about safely procuring that experience? Where do I find the communities? How do I know that somebody's safe in order to go there? That's been quite a hot topic recently. I don't know if you have maybe a little bit of insight that I can get from you.
I'm going to go back to what I just said. Approach it as a mature adult, who, asks questions, has bring pace into it, decide what your pace is of, it depends on, so if you're putting it in terms of, okay, I want to explore my sixth creature and I want to either open it up to my partner, or I want to find someone for casual, just exploration and not looking for a relationship level, all those, and anywhere in between. Decide what your edges are, the pace you want to go. There's plenty of sites, where you can, people are looking for a partner interested in this. I mean, know your areas that you want to explore in. So for instance, I want to try bondage. I'd like to be suspended. I like funny, wacky kind of things, or I don't know, any of those kinds of particular activities. You have to get to your own comfort level where you're going to take that step into some actual real-time experience. And, so follow your instincts, that's always a good thing. Don't go faster or in some territory that doesn't feel safe to you. There's all kinds of protocols and articles about how-tos, about how to set up a scene with someone, negotiate a scene, and all those things that I think have a lot of good content in them, that of kind of best practices. And again, risk is always part of the territory. You have to assess your own risk. Bungee jumping is risky. Skydiving, people love those types of things, however, and continue to do it in a relatively safe ways. So, this is, the unfortunate thing, we are in such a level of sexual shadow, and that's really the next part of it here, that there are people who are unscrupulous and out of integrity and exploitive and manipulative. And just like in any other area of your life, you have to put up your, radar and know when, this person is not someone I want to engage with, and manage it like any other part of your life. But this is the place where our maturity level is still pretty low on the scale, I think, of how we operate our sexuality generally. And I think there's good reasons for that, because this is the kind of world that we've been raised in. We haven't been allowed to be sexually honest. It hasn't been encouraged to be open and honest about our sexuality. So sex has been put into shadow, and it operates there relentlessly if it's not allowed to operate any other way. But this leads to all sorts of problematic issues, from the hiding of it, from that it will sneak. It has a whole set of behaviors that it's slick. It knows how to get through whatever blocks are up. So it risks high stakes risks, because there's so much damage done when someone is busted, is discovered, is called out. It is a tragedy, all because of, to the great extent, not so much because people are such predators and so, unscrupulous. It's just because in many ways they have it's easier to do that than to be sexually honest and have a negotiated consensual engagement of the very same things, or that they didn't, this is, so this also leads to what happens in many relationships of people get into erotic mismatches. They didn't even know it because they never even talked about it to begin with, not consciously anyway. They didn't know it, but after a few decades of being with a partner who's, okay, you're into kink, your partner thinks that's sick and disgusting and horrible, that's a lot of people decades later then finally realize, wait a minute, I never agreed to that. I didn't realize that was the agreement I was making, that I could never get to engage my sexuality, because they recognize, wow, it's decades later, I still have the same desire, the same relentless, thoughts are continually flowing through me about my sexuality, and I've hidden it or hide it, or I've been out sneaking, porning, going to strip clubs, whatever, prostitutions. And this is, each person just needs to, start cleaning up their own act, and then when you have the intention now to be sexually honest, to own it, to celebrate it, to be confident in it, to, be clear about it, but then to, negotiate it honestly with others. That's really all that we can do. Kind of one person at a time has to embrace being sexually honest, being sexually authentic, and being a consensual, negotiated player, out there, be it in relationship or just in casual encounters that one might engage in. And that, for the health of the self, to the burden of people hiding their sexuality and expressing it in these dishonest, shadowy ways, it's a horrible, tragic psychic burden. And that's what I think of, one individual multiplied by hundreds of millions of people. The psychic burden of that, all because of the disapproval and judgment and projection of disgust and immorality that one fears happening. And that's why people hide it, because the judgment, the shaming, the guilting, that they can be exposed to is a horrible thing too. So that then sets up this question of your privacy. This is another level of being authentic or coming to sexual honesty, is you still have a right to privacy, your safety. It's not safe to, it's like, being a gay person in the 50s, it wasn't safe for people to reveal in many cases that they were gay, even though they maybe had embraced it and understood it for themselves, and were, that they didn't have, any obligation, or people should be clear that, yeah, you have every right to privacy. It's nobody else's business, who you are sexually, especially someone who's going to be judgmental and offended and outraged and all. Yeah, don't waste energy on that. But also, once you can own it honestly yourself, then, bring that same maturity to how you review and engage possibilities with someone else. And there's a lot of people, there are more people who are wanting to be just sexually honest, especially, in the kink community. I mean, the whole idea is about transparency and negotiation and all of these different steps and stages to get to this level of sexual honesty, without shadow, transparency. So this is really the personal responsibility here is for each person to take care of their own internal conflicts and shadows, and be on this intention to be sexually honest, and again, with this foundation of fuck yes, that is your birthright. We have been so shamed and beaten down and made to be afraid of our sexuality. It's an injustice, that should be stopped and liberated, to let people just be who they are. It's normal. This is what I said, normal sex, that's what we're talking about. So I'm not even knowing what time we are on here, but how are we doing, I guess?
You're at 3, well, my time is 3:07. You're just over an hour.
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of in the home stretch here, so let me pause there. If anything else is to be said.
I don't have any. We don't have any questions.
Okay. So I just want to close with this appreciation for the people who attended and for those who might listen. I'm advocating, I believe, for sexual dignity. Each person's right to be who they are sexually. That's my mission. That's very important to me, to spread this message and encouragement to be who one is sexually, and to lift this burden of shame and judgment and fear about it. And I think we're in a good trend in those regards. And I think that's important in the general sense. And as far as those who are in the helping professions of therapeutics of some sort or another around helping people in their moving through their own sexual journeys, I really want to thank you all for your own courage and your willingness to step beyond these outdated paradigms, but yet still very strongly enforced. I mean, it is pretty radical to be speaking outside of a clinical or academic evidence-based model. That can get frowned on a lot by the institutionalized views of psychology, and that's where our students are being new generation of sex therapists and psychologists is coming out on this old, outdated model. So I appreciate all of you who are in this vanguard and celebrate that you're helping make this change and bringing about the support that's needed to allow this emerging sexuality to come forth. And finally, if you're interested in some personal consultation on any of the work you're doing, or in a personal sense, this is how you can get a hold of me here. Thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you so much, Alexa, for being such a good, insightful moderator in your own work in the world. And we will conclude it with that. Okie doke. I'm going to stop the recording here. Thankfully, it